Have you ever had a really bad day where you were just irritable and crabby and everyone who said anything made you want to punch them in the face? What if there were a town like that every day all the time? Welcome to Strip Coverlet, where we squeeze the bigger picture out of literature. I'm Adrian Fort, and I almost forgot my book. And we are here for another short story discussion, which will appear in two separate playlists here on the channel. Number one being the short story discussion playlist. Lots of short stories in that playlist, so if you have a favorite short story, consider checking that out for my benefit exclusively. But also, the Ernest Hemingway short story by short story read along playlist. We are going short story by short story through the Finca Vigia edition of the complete short stories of Ernest Hemingway. And today's short story is known as The Light of the World. This video will have three sections: a So What Happened recap of the short story, a literary criticism section where we talk about the literary goings-on in the story itself, and finally a writer's corner where we talk about some of the different elements from this short story that we can learn from the master, from Papa himself, Ernest Hemingway, as writer. So, what happened? Well, two quote-unquote punks are passing through an old company town. This town does logging. This town tans hides. They stop at a bar and order beer. The tender is very wary and does not serve them, does not even pour the drinks until he sees the money. Then there is a bit of an argument that breaks out, and the two youngins, the two punks, are about to leave, and the bartender tells them to leave, and they say, it wasn't your idea, right? We'll get to this in number two of the literary criticism section. This is something that is very big to Ernest Hemingway. They leave in a huff, and they head to the train station. They were just passing through, remember, where they meet some workmen and some prostitutes. Something else very important to Hemingway. Conversation breaks out about Steve Ketchel, the legendary middleweight champion, and his untimely demise. Two of the prostitutes claim to have had some relations with Ketchel. Everyone fights for a little bit. They say, no, you didn't. One of the prostitutes says, no, you didn't. The other prostitute says, yes, I did, you didn't. And the other prostitute says, yes, I did, you didn't. And everyone starts in awe of Ketchel and leaves the conversation perhaps more persnickety than they came into the conversation. And then the train comes, and that's the end of the journey with these characters. The number one thing that I have to say about this short story is that the setting is important on multiple levels, but this is where we should start. When they leave the bar, and remember, they got into a fight in the bar, not a fist fight, but a verbal fight with the bartender, basically because they walked in and the bartender recognized them as punks, and they didn't like being recognized as punks, and they got kicked out. Then they get to the train station. They walk in, and just some random guy there says, "Shut the door, can't you?" someone said. I looked to see who it was, and it was one of the white men. He wore stagged trousers and lumberman's rubbers with a Mackinaw shirt like the others, but he had no cap, and his face was white, and his hands were white and thin. "Aren't you going to shut it?" "Sure," I said, and I shut it. "Thank you," he said. One of the men snickered. "Ever interfere with a cook?" he said to me. "No." "You can interfere with this one." He looked at the cook. "He likes it." The cook looked away from him, holding his lips together tightly. Why is everyone in this place so angry? Why is everyone in this place so standoffish? Why is everyone in this place ready to fight over everything? I think that it's probably just because this is a work town. Everyone is at work. Everyone's life kind of sucks. And when your life kind of sucks, you're ready to take that out on absolutely anyone absolutely any time. But our young punks, they're not from here. They're not bringing in their work day to this. We have reason to believe, by virtue of the fact that they're just passing through a town, they don't have a work life in general. They're vagabonds, they're vagrants, they're wanderers, they're runaways, perhaps they're stowaways. I don't believe we ever see them buy a ticket. Everyone is very angry, and that seems to be part of the meaning of this very short story. Now, we go up back a little bit in this short story, and we get this confrontation at the bar. The bartender had said that they were punks. And then we get this. He says we're punks, Tommy said to me. Listen, I said, let's get out. You punks clear the hell out of here, the bartender said. I said we were going out, I said. It wasn't your idea. Very interesting. This is man code. Don't tell another man what to do, because then by virtue of being a man, he has to not do it. Even if it was his idea. Because if he does it, he has to punch you in the face first. There is a hierarchy in this story. The young punks are struggling, for their place in this hierarchy. They want to see themselves as above the bartender. So when he tells them to get out, even though they were already leaving, this seems like subservience. Everyone is subservient to someone. That is part of the itch to this short story. No one wants to be under anybody else, even when we get to the place with the prostitutes. Everybody is struggling to be the author of their own life. Very important to the story. Someone in this story escaped being anyone's slave. That man was Steve Ketchel. That man came to an untimely death, and we're going to get to that in a little bit. In this same way, they do not listen to the bartender. That was my idea. I was leaving anyway. But when they get to the train station, there is a man with a job. A hard-nosed man with a job. And when he says, isn't someone going to close that door? Our speaker here, who remains nameless, we don't know our speaker's name. That's going to come back in the writer's corner portion. He says, yeah, I'll do it. He listens to another man. He is subservient to that other man. And he acquiesces multiple times in this short story, trying not to cause a ruckus. He's willing to say, okay, yeah, fine. I'll just do it. Very interesting. But I think a lot of the persnickety nature of this short story is that they are in a company town. No one feels free. The idea of freedom in Hemingway. I don't have to call any man my boss. I listen to no one. I am the author of my will. My will be manifest. Very important to the man code. Now, we also have, I recently did a video for The Lottery by Shirley Jackson. Very interesting short story, and the question comes up in that video, where are we? And it's very clear that we're in America because there's diverse last names, because they say Delacroix, because of all of these different little hints. We're definitely in America here. Where are we in this short story? We'd come in that town at one end and we were going out the other. It smelled of hides and tan bark and one of the big piles of sawdust. It was getting dark as we came in, and now that it was dark, it was cold, and the puddles of water in the road were freezing at the edges. Probably, we're in the upper Midwest. We learn a little bit later, probably we're in Michigan. Well, we have reason to believe we're in Michigan because of the references to Steve Ketchel. The ideas at play here are where we are. The literal location, not quite so important. I think Ernest Hemingway saw the great American expanse as freedom. And this idea that the expanse was being dwindled by work towns, by industrialization, may have been troubling to the idea of freedom. And I think that is where we get some of the big hubbub here. Now, number 4 on that, or number 4 there. We have the mention of Ad Wolgast. This is Adolphus Wolgast, an actual boxer, a real guy. We're talking about a real person here. He was known as I can't remember exactly, the Michigan, something like the Michigan Bobcat, a fierce animal. We go further into this lore by mentioning Jack Johnson and Steve Ketchel. Now, Jack Johnson, the first black heavyweight champion, and he was an absolute killer. I mean, he was Darth Vader in boxing, just destroyed people. And fittingly so, Darth Vader wore all black. Jack Johnson was decried in the public for being black. Obviously a very racist time, right? And he wasn't just a champion. Oh no. No. Jack Johnson was a destroyer. So, when we get this mention of Steve Ketchel, it's very, very important that Steve Ketchel had lost to Jack Johnson. The white American hope had lost to this new thing. The white American hope of freedom is losing to industrialization. Now, just to get a little bit deeper into this, into the time frame here, if you have the Fincavigia edition on page 295, during this discussion, they're talking about Steve Ketchel. That was a fine way to look at it, the cook said. Didn't Jack Johnson knock him out, though? It was a trick, Peroxide said. That big dinge took him by surprise. He just knocked Jack Johnson down, and then she curses him. Why is this important? Why is this critical to the text? She had to be there to know that. This is pre-television. This fight was not televised. It would have been on the radio, but radio, very fleeting, had to be there in the moment. No one recorded it. There wasn't recording to be done. That detail lets us know that Peroxide, the prostitute Peroxide, was there. But we do, so that is actual history. That is something that was witnessed. But we get into things that were not witnessed. So Hemingway was, and look, I might be unclear on some of these details, so I'm not going to pretend that I am a pugilistic historian. But Steve Ketchel, several times, so Steve Ketchel was real too. Adolphus Wolgast, real. Jack Johnson, real. Steve Ketchel, real. Steve Ketchel, in the short story, is mentioned to have been gunned down like a dog by his father. This is not true. Hemingway, a pugilistic historian, likely would have known this was not true. What happened to Steve Ketchel? Steve Ketchel did lose to Jack Johnson. Steve Ketchel, I believe, was the reigning champion when he died. He was gunned down. Steve Ketchel, in training for his return to the ring with Jack Johnson, retired to a ranch owned by his friend. While he was on that ranch, he witnessed one of the ranch hands sort of a vagabond himself, sort of a punk himself, Walter Dipley, beating a horse. Ketchel got on to him about it. That hand, Walter Dipley, decided to rob Ketchel at that point. Oh, you think you're going to be my boss? You think you're going to tell me what to do? You think you're going to violate my man code? Come in here and assume to tell me what to do? Boy, I'm going to get one over on you. In the process of robbing Steve Ketchel at gunpoint, Steve Ketchel, a very tough guy, and we'll get into that in a moment, decided, no thanks, I think I'll keep my money, turned around and Dipley shot him. That is how Steve Ketchel died. In Springfield, Missouri, by the way. It was a Missouri tale. Michigan and Missouri, very big deals to Ernest Hemingway. Illinois, Michigan, Missouri, this is kind of the ring where a lot of Hemingway is influenced. Wrote for the Kansas City Star. Said Kansas City reminded him of Paris. I could stop, but reminded him of Paris. You won't believe me, but it does, he said. Anyway, Steve Ketchel, the reason Steve Ketchel is so important to this short story is that he was a Midwesterner. He did escape the rat race. He was also kind of a badass. He was a middleweight who was known for taking on heavyweights. Now, not like today, he didn't put on 30 pounds and take on heavyweights. No, he just stepped in the ring with them. Outweighed by 10, 20, 30 pounds. Boom, boom, boom. And he would beat heavyweights. Much smaller man. Now, just as a short aside here, there's a joke in here about that. How is Alice the prostitute introduced? By her massive size. She's a very large woman. If you know about Steve Ketchel, you catch the joke there. Steve Ketchel was boxing out of his weight class. So you believe Alice because he was not afraid of larger people. But the real reason, in my opinion, that this short story revolves around Steve Ketchel was an underdog. He was an underdog. He was never supposed to succeed. He certainly was never supposed to succeed against heavyweights. And what was he doing? He was a middleweight training to return to the ring against Darth Vader. Seriously, there's footage of Jack Johnson. Go find him and see him absolutely destroy people in the ring. He was training to get back in there with Jack Johnson. So he was an underdog. He had escaped the rat race. He had become his own boss. He was his own man. He was tough. He was an underdog. These people in this story believe he, Steve Ketchel, represented them. They identified with Steve Ketchel, who was gunned down. That's also, so he was gunned down by a punk, right? That's also part of the reason why there is this sort of intuitive hatred of these two young men as they walk through the town. The last thing we're talking about here is kind of, if you're here to write a paper, you're not going to write a paper about this. It's just an interesting factoid from this story. Now, the young men start the story by walking into a bar and both of them order a beer and both of them are served. None of them are carded. We learn later that they are 17 and 19. Is this just a small town skirting the law? No. It was not the law. You did not have to be 21 to drink. Does anyone know why we have to be 21 to drink today? Does anyone know when this started? This started in 1984, the National Minimum Drinking Age Act, which basically says You want money for your highways? Everybody has to be 21 in order to drink. It's ironic that this plays a part in this short story. I'm not arguing against that idea, but it's ironic that it plays a part in this short story because Hemingway would view this as a limitation on your freedoms. The very thing about which this short story seems to me to be written. Now, Writer's Corner, a common problem with Ernest Hemingway. This young man narrating the story, whose name we don't know, we never get it, he's a punk, right? In fact, he's such a punk that he rides around with Tommy. Is it Tommy? No, I've blanked on his name. It's Tommy, right? Yeah, Tommy. And they're punks. And they get kicked out of bars. And they're roaming the wild Midwest of the United States on train. Maybe they're not even buying tickets. Tough guys, rough guys. Do we trust the narrator of this story to really be as articulate as he is on the page? It's a common problem with Hemingway. In fact, it's a common problem really throughout the annals of literature until right around Hemingway. It was right around Hemingway. So T.S. Eliot with, I wasn't prepared to talk about this. The one where the weird guy's wandering through the party and we have the party filtered through his point of view. That one. Anyway, it was right around this point in time that people started realizing, hey, or at least we get the change on the page from this. It's kind of unrealistic that we have all of these narrators being as articulate as the writers themselves. To see what I'm talking about, compare Ernest Hemingway to, for example, George Saunders. George Saunders not afraid to put a stupid narrator on the page, not afraid to put an unarticulate narrator on the page. Hemingway, you're not going to get that. So if it's first person in Hemingway, the guy talks like Hemingway. If it's first person in Hemingway, the guy notices things the way that Hemingway would. Do we trust this narrator to notice the things that he's noticing, or is this ultra truth? Well, at the time Hemingway was writing, it was just kind of a necessary evil of literature because you don't want to put stupid people on the page. You want your stories to be readable. You want your stories to be in your voice. Voice was not quite as malleable as today it is. In fact, today, a malleable voice is seen as a hallmark of a great writer. You have George Saunders, who can write in several different voices. Too often, it ends up being, in my opinion, the same kind of voice, but he can do it. Chuck Palahniuk always writes the same voice. So he has a book that is purposely pygmy, written in another voice, but you're in a Chuck Palahniuk book. So it is an interesting little maybe signifier of time period that Hemingway has so many narrators that probably wouldn't talk like Hemingway but do. I think that this is an interesting point as a writer to come away with, because this idea of a presentable short story forced writers to write in that voice. In my opinion, it's kind of what forced Hemingway into so often deploying Nick Adams as a character. We know Nick Adams probably would have been intelligent. We know Nick Adams, we see Nick Adams' growth process. So Hemingway is not just adopting different protagonists in these short stories. He's using someone that we know, so we're comfortable with that narration coming from a character in the situations that Nick Adams gets himself into. Now, so maybe this is a Nick Adams short story, right? We have to question that. We don't have a name on our narrator, but very interesting short story from that perspective as a writer, because maybe, you know what, it Yeah. Yeah, William Faulkner really did a number with this. Books like As I Lay Dying, you can tell who is the narrator in the specific chapters, and he was willing to write in the voice of different characters. And maybe this is one of the reasons that the two didn't see eye to eye, but I think that looking at the power that Faulkner had to do this can help us as writers. The power that Saunders has to do this can help us as writers when contrasting it with Hemingway. That is all I have for the short story discussion. If you like or appreciate what it is that I do here, hitting the like button really does help me out, as it tells YouTube to share this video with other literature lovers. If you find yourself here by chance but not design, literature is the only thing I talk about on this channel. There's poetry every Monday, and as always, I hope to have you back for the next one.